It has been confirmed. The BBC has reported it. The Met Office has verified it. The UK has just experienced its hottest day of the year so far, a reading that demolished the previous 2026 high of 26.6 degrees Celsius recorded at Kew Gardens on April 8th. And that did it on a bank holiday weekend when nearly 19 million people simultaneously decided today was the day they needed to be somewhere else. Not at home, not in their gardens. On the M5 southbound, in a queue at Dover, at a rails, platform with no shade, and a train that was running late because the track temperature was sitting at 53 degrees Celsius while the timetable was written, for a world where tracks stay cooler than that. The hottest day of the year and the busiest travel weekend of the spring arriving in the same 24-hour window is not an accident. It is the specific convergence that Britain's transport network, its coastal infrastructure, and its overheated families have been managing simultaneously since Friday morning. And what has emerged from that convergence is a picture that is equal parts weather record and national travel story. The RACI's pre-weekend forecast proved precise. Nearly 19 million motorists took to Britain's roads over the long weekend, around 1 million more than the same holiday period in 2025. Polling by the RAC found almost faux. RN10 drivers planned leisure journeys, with Friday and Saturday seeing the heaviest traffic. The M5 southbound was flagged by the RAC as a primary congestion point, with queues of 45 minutes expected at midday on Saturday between Junction 16 near Bristol and Junction 23 for Bridgewater. That prediction was not pessimistic, it was understated. Coastal routes serving popular seaside destinations including Bournemouth, Hastings, and Torquay drew record levels of traffic demand compared with past bank holidays, with local parking systems at breaking point before midday across the most popular beaches. The M25, which serves as the primary orbital ring around London and the exit route for millions of southeast England residents heading toward the coast, carried volumes that Highways England described as the highest of the year to date on Saturday. The Port of Dover was the single most concentrated bottleneck of the weekend, and the reason goes beyond the volume of travelers. Around 18,000 ferry passengers were expected between Friday and Sunday, with travelers warned to expect lengthy border queues as manual passport checks continue under the European Union's entry-exit system. The new border technology is not yet fully operational at the French frontier, despite the installation of new processing kiosks at Dover. The EES, the EU's biometric border process requiring passport data and fingerprints for non-EU nationals entering the Schengen area, was described as the first major implementation test at a high-volume UK holiday departure period. The consequence of biometric processing, replacing the wave-through passport checks that British travelers previously experienced at Calais, is a processing time per vehicle that runs significantly longer than the pre-EES baseline. Multiply that extended processing time by 18,000 passengers across a 3-day window, concentrate the departures into Friday and Saturday morning peak hours when everyone is trying to leave simultaneously, and the Dover queue becomes not a weather story, but an infrastructure story that happens to be unfolding in 30-degree heat with no shade, limited water access, and vehicles whose air conditioning is running continuously while stationary, drawing down fuel reserves and generating engine heat in a queue that stretches back through the port approach roads. The rail network's response to the hottest day of the year confirmed the pattern that Network Rail has documented across every previous significant heat event in the UK. Rail, surface temperatures on fully exposed track sections run more than 20 degrees above ambient air temperature in direct sunlight, translating the day's 30 to 33 degree peak air temperatures into surface readings of 50 to 53 degrees Celsius on the most exposed sections. At those surface temperatures, speed restrictions are imposed on vulnerable older track sections to reduce the kinetic energy that contributes to buckling risk. Those speed restrictions cascade into timetable delays that compound across interconnected services. During the 2022 July event, Network Rail suspended services entirely on multiple routes, with no Thameslink or Great Northern trains running north of London, and Eleanor running no trains south of York and Leeds to King's Cross. The 2026 bank holiday weekend's rail disruptions did not reach that scale. The peak temperatures, while historically exceptional for May, remained below the 40-degree threshold that forced 2022's most severe service suspensions, but speed restrictions on southeast corridor routes, platform overcrowding at London terminals as delayed services concentrated passengers, and the specific pressure on coastal rail routes serving Brighton, Bournemouth, and the southeast beach towns created the familiar bank holiday rail chaos narrative with the additional dimension that the infrastructure was operating under thermal stress rather than just passenger volume stress. Heathrow Airport, the UK's busiest and one of the world's largest, operated under maximum bank holiday capacity simultaneously with the hottest day of the year falling on its departure forecourt. Ground handlers, engineers, and outdoor operational staff working through the peak afternoon hours on the apron were doing so in an environment where aircraft surfaces, tarmac, and jet blast add between 5 and 10 degrees to the ambient air temperature at ground level. On a day when air temperatures reached 30 to 31 degrees across the Heathrow zone, the experienced temperature for outdoor ground crew during active aircraft turnaround operations was approaching 40 degrees at surface level. Occupational health requirements for heat management, mandatory rest intervals, shade access, hydration provisions were in operation. The operational picture of a major international airport running at peak departure volume on the hottest day of the year while simultaneously managing heat safety, requirements for its outdoor workforce, is one that the aviation sector has been managing with increasing frequency, as the seasons in which genuinely hot working conditions occur expand beyond their historical summer window. The coastal towns that drew the majority of the 19 million leisure trips face their own specific infrastructure test. Bournemouth Beach, one of the most popular day trip destinations in England and the site of some of the UK's most dramatic beach crowding events during hot weather, recorded visitor volumes that local parking data confirmed as exceeding any previous May bank holiday benchmark. The same pattern was documented at Hastings, at Torquay, and at the major sandy beaches of Norfolk and Suffolk that sit within the warmest temperature zone of the current warm event. The specific infrastructure risk of extreme beach crowding on the hottest day of the year is the interaction between the volume of people seeking water to cool down and the cold seawater temperature that remains characteristic of the English Channel and the North Sea in May regardless of air temperature. The San Francisco Department of Emergency Management's framework for this risk is directly applicable to UK coastal conditions. The cold water of English coastal waters in late May creates drowning and cold shock risk that is diametrically opposite to what the warm air temperature suggests to a visitor who has spent the day in 30-degree heat and instinctively heads for the water. The RNLI, the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, has consistently documented that its most dangerous call-out periods in terms of cold water shock incidents involve exactly this combination: hot air temperatures, cold seawater, and large numbers of people in the water simultaneously who are not prepared for the thermal contrast. The public health picture of the hottest day of the year, coinciding with 19 million people in motion, concentrates its most acute risk not at the beaches and motorways, but in the homes and care settings of the people who were not traveling. For every family loading a cool box into the car for a beach trip, there's an elderly person living alone in a flat with south-facing windows that have been absorbing solar and the same physiological unacclimatization that the entire population shares after a cold start to May. The UK HSA Extraordinary Heat Health Alert that activated at 9 a.m. on Friday. May 22 and runs through Wednesday. May 27th covers exactly this population. The people who are not on the motorway, not at the beach, not generating the travel story, but who are sitting in indoor environments where the combination of direct solar gain through glass, poor ventilation, and the accumulated heat of consecutive warm days produces conditions that are medically significant even when the temperature outside is lower than the headline peak. The British Heart Foundation's 50% heart attack mortality increase during heat waves applies not to the people swimming in cold seawater at Bournemouth. It applies to the people who have not left their homes, whose neighbors have, and whose condition is deteriorating without anyone nearby to notice. The National Grid's electricity demand management on the hottest day of the year during a bank holiday weekend operates against a profile that is more complex than a simple summer heat wave afternoon. Bank holiday weekends reduce industrial and commercial electricity's demand substantially as factories and offices close, but they simultaneously drive residential and leisure demand sharply upward. Air conditioning units running across millions of homes for the first time this year, electric fans supplementing those that cannot afford or access mechanical cooling, refrigeration systems working harder to maintain food safety at elevated ambient temperatures, and the vast charging demand of the electric vehicle fleet that millions of holiday drivers are recharging at motorway services and coastal car parks throughout the weekend. The National Grid's electricity system operator manages these demand patterns in real time, with interconnector imports from France and the Netherlands supplementing the output of the renewable generation fleet, whose wind component is suppressed by the light wind conditions that accompany the blocking high-pressure system producing the heat. Grid stability on a 30-degree bank. Holiday Saturday requires operational interventions that normal temperature bank holidays do not, and the frequency with which those interventions are required will increase with each successive warm bank holiday as the climate shifts the baseline against which the grid was designed. The water safety dimension of 19 million leisure trips on the hottest day of the year extends beyond the cold water shock risk at coastal beaches to include open water body S inland, rivers, lakes, canals, and reservoirs that attract large numbers of swimmers and paddlers during hot weather, precisely because they appear more accessible, and RNLI's data on inland water deaths in England is stark and consistent. The majority of drowning fatalities in hot weather occur not in the sea, but in inland open water where there are no lifeguards, where currents and obstacles are unpredictable, and where the water temperature, regardless of air temperature, remains dangerously cold, enough to induce cold water shock and incapacitate a swimmer within seconds of immersion. The London Fire Brigade recorded a 32% increase in water-related incidents in the month preceding the current heat wave, compared with the same period the previous year, on the hottest day of the year, with families and groups making impromptu decisions to cool off in rivers, canals, and gravel pits that have no formal safety infrastructure. That trend will not be moving in a reassuring direction. The Fire Brigades Union and the RNLI have both issued specific public guidance during this bank holiday weekend directing the public to formal swimming venues, lidos, and managed beaches rather than natural water bodies. Guidance that is easy to issue and significantly harder to make reach the people who most need it before they are already standing at the water's edge. The specific travel advice that the RACI, the AA, and National Highways have been distributing across the weekend is worth stating clearly for anyone who has not yet made their journey and is planning to travel on Bank Holiday Monday when the temperature forecast peaks at 32 to 33 degrees. The RACI identified Friday afternoon and Saturday midday as the worst congestion. Windows, with Monday likely to be somewhat lighter than Saturday as the return home wave is spread across Sunday evening and Monday. RAC Mobile Servicing and Repairs team leader Sean Kimberlin urged drivers to ensure their cars were summer ready by checking oil and coolant levels and ensuring all tires have plenty of tread and are inflated to the correct pressure. That guidance is not generic maintenance advice on a hot bank holiday weekend. It is specific operational preparation for the scenario where a vehicle sits stationary in a Dover queue or an M5, tailback for 45 minutes or more in 30-degree heat, with the air conditioning running and the engine temperature climbing. Radiator coolant failure is the most common heat and related vehicle breakdown category. Oil system stress under sustained idle with air, conditioning running in high ambient temperatures is the second. Both are preventable with the pre-journey checks the RAC is recommending. The roadside assistance organizations will be stretched across the weekend at a level commensurate with 19 million leisure journeys in the hottest conditions of 2026. The people who did the checks before they left will not need them. The economic dimension of this confluence, hottest day of the year, 19 million roading trips, record coastal visitor volumes, and full Heathrow departure capacity, is the final element of a story that operates simultaneously at the level of individual inconvenience and national economic significance. The tourism and hospitality sector in England's coastal towns and outdo. Our leisure destinations will record revenues this weekend that they have not seen since the comparable warm bank holidays of previous years, with local business owners confirming record footfall and record ice cream, food, and drink sales. Against that positive economic picture sit the fuel costs, already elevated by the Iran oil crisis that has pushed petrol prices 26 pence per litre and diesel 44 pence per litre above pre-conflict levels. That every one of those 19 million drivers is absorbing on a weekend when the distance traveled is above the leisure trip average. The net economic balance of a record hot, record busy bank holiday weekend is difficult to calculate and will not be known until the retail and hospitality data for late May 2026 is reported. What can be said today, on the day the BBC confirmed the hottest day of the year, is that Britain's roads, rails, ports, beaches, and emergency services all simultaneously managed the collision of a temperature record and a travel record. And the picture that emerges from that collision is a preview of the kind of weekend the country should expect with increasing frequency, as the summers that follow continue to run warmer than the ones before them.